This next segment lands us with two engaging speakers who will discuss what's happening with our current workforce and the hard work in place to build on and enforce a skilled country of manufacturing talent. Katherine Ash will talk about what's happening with workforce development on a national scale. And following right after will be Kelly Marie Valerez, who will share what is happening with workforce development on a more local level right here in Connecticut. I'd like to introduce Katherine Ash. Kate Ash is a policy design professional who specializes in helping leaders collaborate across sectors to maximize their impact. She is currently based as a consultant at the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. This is where she advises states on how to transform their education and workforce systems and prepare them for the workforce needs of the future. Thank you so much, Kate, for being here today.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you to Deborah and the rest of the team here for inviting me to participate in this afternoon's event. I was just here in the kind of the backstage waiting room watching the video unfurl over the last couple of minutes and the engaging conversation between our guests just a few minutes ago. And already I can tell this virtual event has really been incredible value add to the community, and I'm just delighted to be here. Today, I'll be talking about reimagining workforce policy in the age of disruption, and really how we take the next steps to prepare the future workforce now. To share a bit more about what it is that I do, as mentioned, I'm a consultant with the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices, which I'll share a little bit about in just a moment. And prior to that, I spent many years on Capitol Hill advising members on workforce policy as well as human service policy, and really designing support systems for states to implement systems change for improved economic outcomes. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the National Governors Association, it is the only consulting firm for governors and their senior policy staff. During COVID-19, our role has really expanded and really has begun to be the clearinghouse of relevant research and guidance, and NGA really now acts as a platform, as a facilitator for dialogue and collaboration among governors and their staff. I know we actually have a number of our partners who are participating in today's event as well. And as you'll see on this next slide, the NGA Center for Best Practices has three primary policy areas. This is where a team of expert staff support governors and their staff to carry out a variety of different projects. As you'll see at the bottom of this list is the Workforce Development and Economic Policy Program. This is the program I work primarily with. And today with us, I know we have some guests who are part of the networks that this team manages, including the National Association of Workforce Board Chairs and the National Association of Workforce Liaisons. So here's what I'm going to be talking about today, the future of work. By 2018, there was a really strong sense of urgency and understanding that the future of skills and learning was changing. You'll see at the top of your screen here, we knew that just a couple of years ago that up to a third of the workforce in the US would likely need to learn new skills and find new occupations by 2030. This, of course, is one of many statistics that I know this group is probably familiar with as to why preparing the future skills of the future and prepare the future workforce is so vital. As a result of that, the National Governors Association, in partnership with the FAB Foundation and FHI 360, launched Future Workforce Now. This was a project that took place actually just until this past summer in 2020 and was aimed at helping states to implement policies and systems that sufficiently prepare workers to be successful in the face of technological disruption. We know, of course, that it's anticipated that many workers will need to frequently not only obtain new skills, but that these disruptions will be particularly disproportionate in impacting vulnerable populations across the United States. We've certainly seen this not only become more true with the onset of and the continuation of the COVID-19 global crisis. And you'll see at the bottom here really what our approach with this project was all about. We began by bringing together over the course of a year 3 series of expert roundtables with some of the global experts in economic research, workforce, higher education, and supportive services that workers need to be successful in the workforce. Together, we built a framework, which I'll share a little bit more about in just a moment, before presenting that to a series of 27 states that joined us for a state policy forum in October of last year. And this is where we actually brought together state leaders, governors, senior advisors to come together and think about how to use that framework to implement action for positive change in their workforce. In this past July, we then published a state guide, which I know the team here will make available for all of you to take a look at, that includes this framework, as well as over 150 state examples of how states are preparing their future workforce. We now, of course, are helping states to take action on many of these recommendations, which I'll share a little bit more about in a few minutes. So what were the findings of this important work? First, we found, as many of you are most likely even more familiar than we are, jobs are changing, not necessarily becoming obsolete. Second, that skill development is absolutely essential, and that there's enormous emphasis and movement towards skill development rather than seat time in education and training. And finally, that there is going to be a growing dependency on a new kind of work and the on-demand workforce that traditionally has not always been engaged in or has necessarily had the types of supports that are necessary in our kind of traditional definition of work. And so here is the framework that this team developed. As you'll see here, there are three major transformations for preparing the future workforce. The first is to build a statewide ecosystem to promote continuous lifelong learning. So you'll sort of see that in the green section of the framework presented here. And second, we found that you have to really invest in an agile, technologically resilient workforce. You have to make sure that individuals really have the skills and experience to interact with the technology and automation that is now so part of our present day. And third, we found absolutely essential to our workforce development systems is enabling every worker to really participate in work and learning through comprehensive supports. So things like childcare, healthcare, mental health supports, and granting flexibility to workers who may be doing some income smoothing with alternative work arrangements or who needed flexible homework arrangements, as so many of us have become familiar with. So this was the framework that was developed throughout those roundtables that I mentioned that we presented at the forum. And we developed this framework in part because we wanted states to be able to take specific actions in key areas to achieve these three objectives. As I mentioned, the state guide that accompanies this framework has examples of how states have taken action on the 10 pathways that you see listed here, orienting leaders toward a shared strategic vision, creating the data infrastructure that is really necessary to track and support workers throughout their lives. Third, building a transparent, portable credential infrastructure, which I know is a huge topic for today's discussion, and I'll touch on in more detail in just a couple of minutes. And fourth, designing accountable financing mechanisms. So making sure that the funding that's coming to states and localities and employers to participate in work and training and really get those workers skilled up for the future are actually accountable to the longer-term industry needs that states and communities have. In the second transformation, investing in an agile, technologically resilient workforce, we really focused on needing to innovate teaching and learning so that students at a much earlier age were learning to interact with the kind of technology that would be more present throughout their work. We found that we needed to engage employers in building learning pathways, again, that really not only embedded this kind of technology, but also enabled them to know how to work with and really adapt to the kind of flexible skills that would be required in today's new collar workforce. And seventh, we actually focused on becoming a model employer. And this was a really exciting component of this work where we wanted to make sure that states who in many cases, in some states, are their largest employers, were actually thinking about how to make sure their workforces had the supports and the skills that they needed to be successful. And in this third transformation, again, I mentioned some of the components of that work, but a big part of that, of course, is financing and making sure that the financing that exists to support individuals, workers, students, adult learners, individuals of all kinds really are available and enable long-term continuous lifelong learning across a variety of subjects. Ninth, we really focused on removing barriers to education and training. This was, as I previously mentioned, things like childcare, mental health supports, and making sure that a healthy workforce was part of a resilient workforce. And finally, again, kind of really granting flexibility to workers to ensure that individuals who were participating in those alternative work arrangements weren't necessarily cut out of the entire workforce education and training system. So, and as I previously mentioned, governors and many state leaders have already begun to take action across these 10 pathways. They really need to reconsider, as we focused on in this work, how they can prepare their educators to be a part of this process, both in what they do in their classrooms or training centers, and how they understand their role in systems change. So I thought it might be fun to spend a couple of minutes to actually dive into a couple of these that I thought the audience today might be interested in. And first is that pathway I talked about with innovative teaching and learning. And here on your screen are just 3 examples of the states who we highlighted who are leading in some of this work. Vermont, which is actually my home state, no bias there, but enacted a flexible pathways initiative several years ago that really focused on skill development and long-term skill development that led to that industry recognized credential. Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf has launched the PA Smart initiative, which is all about driving computer science, not only in K-12, but also ensuring that adult workers and individuals who are in the workforce have access to the kind of entrepreneurial skills and technological skill development that they need throughout their lifetime. And finally, as I'm sure some of you are familiar with, and was a big plug of our partners certainly at the Fab Lab and the Fab Foundation, Tennessee has been doing some really fascinating work around introducing workers of all ages and certainly students to actually interact with technology through makerspaces. And of course, related to today's topic of conversation, the credential infrastructure, really knowing that we've got to make some adjustments in our credential infrastructure to recognize that individual learning and working doesn't necessarily happen in the same way. Here are just 3 of our stronger state examples. You'll see Connecticut, of course, is listed here, and Governor Lamont had signed an executive order requiring states really to bring transparency to credentials to make sure not only individuals, but educators and certainly employers really know what they were paying for and what they were getting in their workforce. Alabama has also launched some interesting work in this area in partnership with Credential Engine to launch a statewide committee and public-private entity that actually verifies credentialing in partnership with employers. And of course, hopefully some of you are certainly familiar. I know Sarah Bover, who's here today, helped really make sure that our team was tracking the great work that New Mexico has been doing in partnership with the Fab Lab Hub to create a digital badging program. This was one of our stronger examples that we included quite a bit of detail on in our state guide. So for those who are interested, I encourage you to check that out to learn more. So these best practices become even more important in today's economy, and that is because, as many of you are probably familiar with, the history books tell us that many industries end up being at much higher risk of automation during an economic downturn. I thought, we can certainly talk about the past work we've been doing, but probably most important and relevant is putting it in today's context in today's economic circumstance. So what you're looking at here on this slide, this graph actually shows what percentage of unemployment claimants during the pandemic previously worked in specific industries. You'll notice that several of the industries that account for the largest portion of UI claimants, so these are people who are dislocated and out of work, actually closely mirrors those industries with the highest risks of job automation and reduction: accommodation and food services, healthcare and social assistance, retail trade, and of course, manufacturing. I think what's important to note here in particular is that the industries hit hardest by the business closures this year that were implemented to slow the spread of the virus are by and large the same industries that were already starting to see an increase in tech change and automation, either changing or in some cases even eliminating jobs. So, I think important too is that even as we start to see employment tick back up a bit in many of these industries over time, there is absolutely some early evidence to suggest that these industries are going to speed up these types of automated adjustments during this time, which really puts a lot of these workers importantly at risk. I think also important to note, of course, is that as a result of all of that, these people will really need access to more education and training opportunities, and this absolutely has implications for the types of jobs our children and really the next generation can be prepared for. So what does all of this tell us about how states must make adjustments to their workforce development pipelines, really to account for the changes that we're seeing not only this year, but that certainly have been accelerated? On your screen, you'll see just a couple of the questions that have really been posed by the pandemic. These are questions that states are certainly asking us. We are asking of states and our partners in this important work. And I think the real underlying theme here is that the push and pull between profoundly urgent needs that are here today and the longer-term, future-focused vision and needs that states have to be confronted with is really kind of the bulk of the work and where states are focused. We know states really do need support in doing both, in most cases with fewer resources. So what are we doing at NGA to help support states in this work? Very briefly, our team is helping states to embed this work through a new offering. This is an agenda development for workforce recovery, a new project that actually we launched just this week. And just to get a sampling, you can see we have nearly 30 state participants that are going to be engaged with us over the work over the next 5 weeks to really embed some of these shorter term response activities into their longer term planning. So finally, just to wrap up, I wanted to just highlight briefly a couple of opportunities for movers and makers in this space. First, I'll just say that a recovery really requires orchestration of top-down action by government and manufacturers using public sector levers, budget, logistics, policy, legislation, and also the bottom-up responses that I know so many of you have been a part of. Many of you have also been sharing your models, your plans, your tools with other partners across the country, and spreading this wealth and knowledge and experiences is vitally important to our recovery. And finally, I'll share this as I did with some of our partners at MakerspaceCT, is that communicating your successes to your partners in and out of state government is vitally important to making sure that these opportunities can be seized. And this crisis really presents lots of opportunities for growth and expansion for these services in the years to come. So I'll wrap up there with a strong and emphatic, emphatic thank you to those of you who are participating in today, who are engaged in this work. And I look forward to chatting with you all more and answering some questions during the panel shortly. Thank you.
Support for the New England Maker Summit provided by our innovation partner, Stanley Black & Decker. Additional sponsors include the Rutledge Family Foundation, Mastercam, MPH Engineering LLC, CBIA, ReadyCT, and Constep. Thank you for your support.